Gender neutral language is another part that we should concentrate on. The concept of gender neutral language has gained significant attention in recent years as a tool for promoting inclusivity and reducing gender biases. By understanding what gender neutral language is and why it's becoming increasingly common, we can better appreciate its role in creating respectful and equitable environments. Here, we will explore the definition and importance of gender neutral language, its real world applications, its impact on reducing gender stereotypes, and some of the common controversies and resistance it faces. Gender neutral language refers to the practice of using words and phrases that do not specify or assume a particular gender. This includes moving away from traditionally gendered terms like policeman or chairman in favor of gender neutral alternatives like police officer or chairperson. The aim is to create language that is inclusive and representative of all people regardless of gender. Language is not just a tool for communication, it's a lens through which we see the world. The words and structures we use often reflect unconscious biases and societal norms. For centuries, language has been crafted around a worldview that centers male experience as the default, leaving women, non-binary individuals, and other gender minorities either as afterthoughts or invisible altogether. For example, the use of generic pronouns like he to refer to an unspecified individual. This reinforces the notion that average person is male, implying that others are deviation from the norm. By moving toward gender neutral language, we begin to reshape these outdated views. Instead of assuming a male default, gender neutral language makes room for everyone to feel recognized. It signals that people of all genders have an equal place in our narratives and conversations. Beyond pronouns and phrases, gender neutral language creates an environment where all individuals feel seen and respected. Looking at the real world applications, gender neutral language is increasingly being implemented in various spheres of society, from professional environments to education and legal context. First, at workplaces, many organizations have adopted gender neutral terms in job titles, policies, and communications. For example, instead of fireman or firewoman, companies may use firefighter or supervisor. Some organizations also encourage employees to share their preferred pronouns as part of a broader effort to respect gender identity. Schools, in educational settings, teachers and staff are encouraged to use inclusive language in the classroom. Instead of addressing a class as boys and girls, for example, some teachers opt for phrases like students or everyone to be more inclusive of students who may not fit traditional gender categories. In legal documents, those are increasingly using gender neutral terms to ensure inclusivity. For instance, marriage certificate and government forms may use a spouse instead of husband or wife. These changes are especially important as they ensure that legal language is inclusive and accessible to everyone regardless of gender identity. Looking at the impact of the gender stereotypes, one of the key benefits of gender neutral language is its potential to reduce gender biases. Language has a powerful role in shaping our perceptions, and by choosing words that do not assume or enforce gender, we can contribute to breaking down these stereotypes. and among them is reducing biases in perception. When we use gender neutral language, we avoid the several reinforcement of gender roles. For example, referring to a doctor as they rather than assuming he or she helps reduce the automatic association of certain professions with a particular gender. Then, normalizing inclusivity by consisting using neutral terms, we can gradually change the way people think about gender roles and identities. For example, shifting from mothering to parenting when discussing child rearing normalizes the idea that nurturing roles are not restricted to women, helping to challenge the stereotypes about gender and caregiving. Now, apart from this, there are certain controversies and resistance from certain corners as well, and we always have disagreement on anything that we initiate. So, despite its positive intentions, gender neutral language is not without controversy, and some people resist these changes. Some of the common objections are it is unnecessary. Some argue that changing traditional language is unnecessary and that it complicates communication. Critics may see gender neutral language as an overreach, claiming that gendered language does not inherently harm inclusivity. Then also their claim is that it's confusing. So it is said that gender neutral terms can be confusing or awkward to use. For instance, the singular they as a pronoun for individuals can be seen as grammatically incorrect by those used to more traditional language structures, even though it is widely accepted as inclusive. Fear of losing cultural norms is another resistance. Other expresses concern about losing cultural or linguistic traditions. For example, some languages have deeply gendered grammar structures that require significant changes to accommodate gender neutrality, leading to debates about whether these adjustments might erode linguistic identity. And how to address this resistance, and this can be addressed by educating and by empathy. While these objections reflect genuine concerns, it's helpful to address resistance with education and empathy. Promoting understanding of gender neutral language as a tool for inclusivity rather than a restriction on a speech can help foster more open minded perspectives. Education around language change is also important. We can emphasize that language has always evolved to meet the needs of society, and this shift is a natural continuation of that evolution. Now, broader societal shift. If you look at, we are seeing a shift in this direction across the world, from universities adopting they as a singular pronoun in academic writing to governments officially endorsing gender neutral language in public communications. These changes may seem small, but together they contribute to a society that values inclusivity. They also provide individuals with a language that respects and represents their identities, reducing the psychological burden of navigating spaces that overlook or misunderstand their experiences. Then, if you look at the representation, gender representation of language and media, so first we can see media portrayal of gender. So, media outlets, including advertisements, movies, television shows, and news, often convey gender norms through both visual and verbal cues. Historically, this language used in media has reinforced traditional gender roles by framing men and women in a specific, often limited ways. So first, we can look at in the advertisements. So gendered language in ads has historically reinforced the stereotypes such as portraying women in caretaking or domestic roles, while men are depicted as strong, decisive, and successful. Phrases like for the man who has everything or for the woman who cares subtly enforce these expectations, associating masculinity with power and femininity with nurture. Even product language like men's razor or for her suggests that men and women should use different products, reinforcing binary and stereotyped identities. Then, in movies and TV shows, like popular movies and shows often depict gender roles through stereotypical language and character dialogue. Female characters might use more tentative or polite language aligning with stereotypical feminine qualities, while male characters may use more assertive, direct speech. The language of scripts can suggest that men are supposed to be heroes and women are caretakers, and these patterns can reinforce limited views of gender identity. Although some media challenge these norms, traditional portrayal continue to dominate, especially in certain genres like action or romantic films. In news and reporting, in news coverage, studies have found gendered language in how male and female politicians, athletes, and professionals are described. Male figures are more often referred to by last names, suggesting authority and formality, while female figures are referred to by first names, which can seem more casual or even diminish their authority. Reporting on women's appearances also remains common in mainstream media with phrases like dressed elegantly or visibly emotional, used to describe female public figures, which may reinforce traditional view of femininity. By choosing a specific language, media outlets convey subtle messages about appropriate behavior and roles for men and women, reinforcing societal expectations that can be hard to shift. Now we can look also at its influence on the children. The impact of media language on children's understanding of gender is especially powerful. Children absorb language and cues from the media around them, shaping their perception of what is normal or expected for their gender. Especially in toy advertisement, many toy ads and packaging traditionally use language that reinforces gender roles. Words like strong, powerful, and battle ready are often used in ads for boys' toys, while words like beautiful, nurturing, and creative are used for girls' toys. Such language influences children's interest, with boys encouraged to play with action-oriented toys and girls nudged towards dolls or domestic themed toys, setting expectations for future role. Children's TV shows and movies, characters in children's media are often gendered through language even when they are animals or fantastical beings. Male characters are frequently assigned active, problem solving roles with language that enforces bravery and strength, while female characters are portrayed as supportive, using language focused on empathy, kindness, and cooperation. These verbal cues send messages to young viewers about gendered behaviors, reinforcing stereotypes from an early age. By embedding gendered language in children's media, these portrayals may limit how children see their possibilities, influencing interest, self-esteem, and ambitions based on narrow traditional gender roles. Then we can see as language perception some examples as a case study. So like first one in gender neutral language in media and marketing. So, media and marketing play a powerful role in shaping societal expectations, and companies are increasingly adopting gender neutral language to support inclusivity. Fortunately, the media landscape has started to embrace more inclusive language that challenges traditional gender stereotypes. In response to changing societal attitudes, many media creators and advertisers are rethinking how they represent gender both visually and linguistically. This trend is especially notable in children's products, toys, and clothing, where traditional gender stereotypes have often been enforced through language and visuals. First, in toys and clothing, major toy brands have started removing gender labels from products and marketing them in more inclusive way. For instance, Lego recently introduced a gender neutral approach, releasing building sets and ads that do not specify whether the toys are for boys or girls. Target, a major US retailer, had also moved to remove boys and girls labels in children's section, including for toys and bedding in response to parents advocating for inclusivity. Similarly, major clothing brands like John Lewis in the UK and Zara globally have introduced unisex or all gender clothing lines for children, sending the message that clothing styles should not be limited personal expressions or interest based on gender. Then, in media and advertising, the language in marketing materials is also shifting to avoid reinforcing stereotypes. In advertisements, companies like Mattel have developed lines such as the gender neutral Barbie doll, where dolls come in a variety of appearances and are marked in a way that encourages children to choose toys based on interest rather than gender. Moreover, advertising copy avoids gendered language, replacing phrases like for boys who love action with for kids who love action. To support more inclusive messaging by adjusting language to be more neutral, these brands are helping to break down traditional gender roles and encouraging a more open minded view of identity and self expression. These shifts reflect a growing awareness among companies that language and branding impact how young people see themselves and others, potentially fostering a more inclusive and less restrictive environment for a young age kid. Next is gender language in high stake environments. So, in a high stake context, such as education and standardized testing, several gendered language can impact performance, participation, and confidence, especially in fields like science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, which better known as STEM, where gender stereotypes are prevalent. In standardized testing, research has shown that the wording in test questions can influence a students' performance and perception. For example, questions that include traditionally male associated language or scenarios like referencing sports more associated with boys or stereotypically male dominated careers can subconsciously reinforce stereotypes, making certain students feel less confident or capable. Organizations responsible for standardized tests such as SAT and GRE have made efforts to review questions for gender neutrality to avoid this unintended bias. Instead of assuming default male perspective, questions are rewritten with inclusive or neutral language, which can create a fairer environment for all test takers. STEM education materials. In STEM subjects, where male-dominated language is historically more common, inclusive language has proven to boost engagement. Textbooks and problem sets are now more likely to incorporate gender-neutral names and inclusive scenarios like Alex and Taylor work together to build robot rather than Tom and Jerry in traditional masculine roles. Studies have suggested that these changes make a measurable difference in helping uninterrupted students, particularly girls and non-binary students, feel that these subjects are for them too. By using inclusive and gender neutral language, educational materials can help reduce barriers to entry for students across the gender spectrum. These real world applications highlight how shift in language can have broader social and psychological impacts, particularly in high stakes settings where performance and self perception are intertwined. Now, looking at the future directions and ongoing discussions on this topic, you will see gender neutral language in official documents and policies. So, here we will look at the key areas where language and gender inclusivity are developing and discuss where these trends might lead us. Across the globe, institutions are increasingly adopting gender neutral language in official documents and public policies to foster inclusivity and reflect societal shifts in gender norms. Looking at the government and legal changes, many governments are updating language in laws, forms, and official communications to be more gender neutral. For example, countries like Canada and Australia now provide gender neutral options on passports and other identity documents such as X or non-binary or unspecified gender. In many parts of Europe, legislative language is shifting from gender-specific terms, for example, fireman, to neutral ones like firefighter, and so on. Corporate and workplace policies. So, large companies, especially in technology, education, and finance, are updating their internal policies and communications to be gender neutral. In HR policies, terms like maternity leave are being replaced with paternal leave to be inclusive of all caregivers regardless of gender. Many companies are also adding non-binary options in employee records and emphasizing inclusive language in workplace training. These changes make institutions more accessible and respectful of individual identities. Now, looking at the trends towards more inclusivity in academic and workplace environment. So, academic institutions and workplaces are at the forefront of inclusivity initiatives, especially when it comes to language. In higher educational shift, universities and schools are moving towards gender inclusive language in classrooms, syllabi, and administrative policies. Some institutions encourage or require instructors to use they, them pronouns when referring to students whose gender is unknown, and students are often invited to share their preferred pronouns. Gender neutral restrooms are also becoming common on campuses, helping students and staff feel more welcome regardless of gender identity. Workplace inclusivity training. Many workplaces are introducing training programs to educate employees on gender inclusivity, including proper use of pronouns and awareness of non-binary and gender fluid identities. In internal communication, terms like team or colleagues are replacing ladies and gentlemen, fostering an environment where everyone is addressed in a way that feels inclusive. Although these changes reflect progressive attitudes, they are not without challenges. In academia, some argue that mandating pronoun use infringes on free speech, while in the workplace there can be generational gaps in acceptance and understanding of gender neutral language. Now we can look at the role of language in evolving discussions on gender identity. Language is central to conversations on gender identity, equity, and representation, especially as society seeks to make a space for a wider range of identities. Now, growing recognition of non-binary and gender fluid identities. As more individuals identify outside the traditional male-female binary, language is adapting to reflect this diversity. Terms like non-binary, genderqueer, and gender fluid are becoming more widely understood and accepted, and pronouns beyond he and she, like they, ze, and he, are being used. Mainstream acceptance of these terms allows people of various identities to be acknowledged and respected. Equity in representation. So, representation in media, literature, and public discourse has profound implications. By expanding our language to include all gender identities, society fosters a culture of equity where all people can see themselves reflected and respected in language. Language that only accounts for binary gender identities can feel exclusionary. Inclusive language challenges these constraints, contributing to a world where all identities have equal value and presence. So these evolving discussions are accompanied by ongoing debates, particularly around linguistic changes. Some individuals feel discomfort at the pace of language evolution or express resistance to new pronouns. Others question whether language alone is enough to dismantle ingrained gender biases. Finally, the relationship between language and gender is profound, reflecting societal values, shaping perceptions, and influencing individual identities. Through our examination of gender neutral language, media representation, and impacts of gender language on both adults and children, it is clear that language not only mirrors but also reinforces cultural norms and biases. Moving towards gender media represents a positive shift towards inclusivity. By adopting terms that do not assume gender, we challenge traditional stereotypes and broaden our concept of identity, promoting a world where all individuals feel represented and respected. However, the path to fully integrating gender neutral is not without challenges. As seen in examples from languages with gendered structures such as French and German, changes face resistance from both cultural traditionalists and linguistic authorities. Similarly, in media and marketing, companies increasingly recognize the power of neutral language to promote diversity. Though they must carefully navigate public expectations and established norms. Ultimately, fostering gender inclusivity through language requires a balance of empathy and education. While some may view these changes as disruptive, language has always evolved in response to society's needs. By encouraging more inclusive language, we set a foundation for future generations to perceive gender in a more open, fluid way, free from limiting stereotypes. This transformation has the potential to reshape not only our language but also our interactions, ensuring that all voices are heard and valued in the narratives we share. In embracing this shift, we take meaningful steps towards a society that celebrates diversity in both language and life. This is what it was in today's lecture. Thank you for listening, and I hope you may have got some idea how language and gender work in the present society and how it is going to be used in days to come. So with this, thank you very much. Thank you.